Hello friends, welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today's video we are going to talk about Azure Data Factory and what that does in the Azure infrastructure, and we will basically talk about some introduction about Azure Data Factory and for what purpose it could be used. I'll be actually creating a new playlist also for Azure Data Factory as requested by multiple students, so that's why I'm taking this one also as a separate playlist. Now, just in order to kind of understand Azure Data Factory, Azure Data Factory is a cloud-based serverless tool. So it means you don't need any infrastructure or anything. You could just create an instance of the Azure Data Factory on Azure, on the cloud, and you could start run that Azure Data Factory for certain reasons. Now, one of the things which it could do is it could be used for ETL process, which is popularly known as extract, transform, and loading of the data that you could use. And it could also be used for creating data-driven workflows. Now, data-driven workflows means you are actually reading some data, might be from some source, and you are putting it into another sink or a data destination environment. So that's where the workflows they come into picture. They have something based upon from one source to the destination. You are actually transforming or reading data or actually putting that data into the destination. And it could also be used to orchestrate data movements as I defined within those workflows. So you could have a copy activity, or you could have a movement of the data from one source to another destination, or you could even have like a physical file being copied from a storage account to another container or a folder. Now, this Azure Data Factory, if you have already known about Microsoft's SSIS packages or ETL tool, that was one tool which came along with Microsoft SQL Server tech stack, and people used it. In fact, I have developed many packages using SSIS services. So in fact, Azure Data Factory does allow you to host SSIS packages within the ADF, and you could use it for multiple reasons. Now, there are different components of ADF which we could use. The first component which we need to understand is a linked service. Though I'm in this slide, I'm actually making those components kind of visible to you and explaining it. In the next slide, we'll actually see visually what those components individually means and how they connect within the framework of ADF. Now, linked service is the first component, and it is a representation of a connection to any service. So for example, we can have a linked service to a storage account or Azure Storage SQL PaaS service or anything. So it means linked service actually is a kind of a connection service that connects to any of the services, whether within the Azure or a third-party service, that is represented with the term named as linked service. So that's one of the major components you need to remember. The second is data sets. Now, data set, as I think so everybody knows it, it's a kind of a data structure, like a data that is represented in the form of a data within a data store, but it is going to use that linked service. Now, data set cannot exist without the linked service. So it means if I have a linked service to SQL Server, then one of the data sets could be a select query from a particular table. So that is represented as a data set. So that's the second thing which we need to remember. And the another major component of ADF is the activity. So this actually represents the workflow or actions. For example, we could have a copy data or a file movement service or whatever you want to do, that would be represented through an activity. Now, in order to put these major components of ADF into a more contextual representation, the next slide is more like a visual of the same components. Now, if you see, as I mentioned, that data set is some kind of a data representation, might be a joined data with two tables or a single select query from a single table or whatever. This data set would actually be linked up to an Azure storage or a linked service. service. So the data set cannot exist without the linked service. Now let's say in this particular case, we have an Azure storage account or anything which could act as a linked service. Now, once you have established a link service, the data set could refer that linked service, by which we could actually read a file or could create a data that represents from a CSV or anything. So you could have multiple linked services and multiple data sets within the Azure Data Factory. Now, the same way I can have another data set, let's say, which is a representation of any select query or a data. And I could have another linked service, which is being linked to an Azure SQL DB, and one of the data sets could refer that particular linked service. So it means within the Azure Data Factory, I could have multiple linked services and there could be multiple data sets based upon certain linked services. So that's one very important concept. Now we understand data set, we understand linked service. So the last piecemeal is the activity which we were trying to, let's say, understand. So the third component, which is an activity, is actually like, for example, I want to data copy activity from storage to Azure SQL. So let's say I want to read a CSV file, get that data, and then transform it and put it into, let's say, an Azure SQL. So that whole stuff would be represented by an activity. Now, an activity actually uses the linked services, the data sets, what we have defined, and that's how the whole orchestration would come into picture. So I hope, guys, this is one of the most important components that you should know if you are targeting to learn ADF and how it could work. So we actually went through the understanding of an ADF, what exactly that tool is all about. It's a serverless tool used for data orchestration or data movements. And we also came to know about the multiple components that form a part of the ADF, and through a visual representation, as now you could see on the screen, this is how those components behave within an Azure Data Factory. So I hope, guys, this is a quick starter for you to understand ADF, what exactly that means. And I'm gonna come up with another videos on ADF and other concepts on different playlist as I get time and put more content. So if you have not already subscribed to my channel, please do subscribe it. And I wish everyone all the best, and please stay safe, and thank you.